Welcome to the podcast, Amazing Tales About History. And I'm your host, Mike Allen. Before we get into this week's show, a quick comment about that name. You may have already seen the new name for this podcast or its visual logo, but the new name is Amazing Tales About History. With this episode, number 196 since we started back in September of 2021, we're giving Amazing Tales a bit of a facelift. We're expanding our reach beyond the boundaries of the great state of Connecticut. Now, interesting history, of course, happens everywhere, and we're going to spend a little bit more time checking out some of those amazing stories going forward that happen outside the states. We're not going to be abandoning Connecticut. We'll still bring you great stories from the Nutmeg State. We'll simply be mixing in contributions from other states as well in the future. Now, this week's episode, most people I know have either driven over the George Washington Bridge or passed underneath it on the Henry Hudson Parkway. It's a magnificent structure. There's a lot behind the story of how it got built and what it's like, frankly, to try and repaint it. Well, here to share a treasure trove of information about the bridge is Justin Rivers. Now, Justin works for a group called Untapped New York. It's an online magazine and experience company that was originally created to simply help New Yorkers rediscover their own city. Well, now it's grown so much that it's to the point where they cater to people from all over the world, introducing them to all those secret gems hiding in New York City. Justin, well, he's the Chief Experience Officer for Untapped New York, and true to that title, you're going to experience some incredible information about the background of this great bridge. This week's trivia question, it's called Putz Hill, and on it occurred one of the most death-defying displays of horseback riding under gunfire ever seen in Connecticut or anywhere else for that matter. What town is Putz Hill located in? Well, stay tuned after the main program for the answer, because then you'll have the topic for next week's show. The George Washington Bridge, an iconic, almost 100-year-old suspension bridge connecting the Washington Heights neighborhood of Manhattan with Fort Lee in New Jersey. It's nearly a mile long, which is huge for a suspension bridge. The bridge carries Interstate 95, of course, across the river, along with U.S. Routes 1 and 9. Well, beauty, of course, is in the eye of the beholder, but I've always found the GWB to be a gorgeous and magnificent bridge. In fact, right up there with some of the other classics like the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, which I've also been over. Our guest today, Justin Rivers, is the Chief Experience Officer for a company called Untapped New York. He also finds the bridge to be beautiful. Like me, he's not, though, entirely comfortable with heights, although he has walked out onto the bridge with groups, something that you won't find me doing anytime soon. What you'll learn today about the GWB are some fascinating pieces of trivia, some unbelievable additions to the bridge that were originally planned but scrapped before construction began, and some mind-numbing stories about heights. Well, Justin, you're a New Jersey guy, I'm a Connecticut guy, and what do you know, we both love to come into New York City, and you're there now, and I come in there all the time, and when I do, I drive down the Henry Hudson Parkway, if for no other reason, just to drive under the grand George Washington Bridge. I'm one of these people who thinks, I don't care whether it's all steel, it's gorgeous, it's great, and I'd imagine that I would feel the same way a San Francisco person would looking at the Golden Gate Bridge, also another beautiful bridge. And what I wanted to start off talking about was the fact that back in 1931, I mean, it's coming up on its 100th anniversary. Back in 1931, when the George Washington Bridge was open, it was the longest span in the world and held that title until the Golden Gate Bridge came in. But could you just describe to us the actual makeup of the bridge, the upper level, the lower level, how many lanes, just sort of give people a sense of that?
The George Washington Bridge is, I always like to say, one of those miracle feats of New York engineering. So yeah, when it debuted in 31, it was the largest suspension bridge. The span itself was 3,500 feet. It only opened with the upper deck. The lower deck came later. And I think it's absolutely adorable that, to those who know, the lower deck is actually known as Martha, whereas the top deck is the George Washington Bridge. So you have George and Martha represented there. And it's really quite impressive now that it has 14 lanes of traffic on it. I think there's 8 on the upper deck, 6 on the lower deck. Almost 110 million cars travel across it annually.
Well, that makes it the busiest roadway in the United States. And as I understand it, it's the world's busiest vehicular bridge. And it's also the only suspension bridge with 14 lanes of traffic, which, as you put it, and I did not know this until today, George and Martha. So I will always remember that. It's a classic. Other thing is that maybe people don't fully understand is not only does it carry all that traffic, but people walk across that bridge, don't they?
It's a very well used bridge for running, for walking, and for biking. If you've ever walked or biked or ran across it, you definitely should not be afraid of heights. You're on the side of the bridge, you're very, very high up. It's definitely an experience, but I've walked out there with groups before, and it's not a lot of room, but the bikers, boy, they are short competitive when they bike over the bridge. It's a main thoroughfare for a lot of people who like to bike down the Palisades. It's very well known for bikers in the tri-state area.
What I love is that for the first 10 years, roughly, of the bridge, they actually charged a toll for people who walked across.
I think it was a dime. And the first guy to do it was a guy named Jose Acuna on the day that they opened the bridge. He was, again, sort of very proud to be the first man to do it. The man behind him, I think his name was Ray Salmus. There's a picture of them from the Daily News, and Jose is sort of really happy to be dropping his dime into the cup that the attendant had there at the gate. And Ray Salmus behind him looks really kind of ticked off that he's the second guy.
One of the things I was shocked to find out, and this is one of the many things that Untapped New York brings to the surface for people, there was going to be in the original plan a rooftop observatory with elevators going up to the top of the bridge. That's just phenomenal.
Yeah, there were a lot of people who were involved in the sort of birth pangs of the George Washington Bridge. The man who designed the bridge was a Swiss architect who would go on to be sort of New York's master bridge builder, and his name was Othmar Ammann. But before Ammann took over, Cass Gilbert actually was the architect of note, and Cass Gilbert was designing these towers that would have actually been something more akin to like a pared down Woolworth building. The towers were actually supposed to be sheathed in stone. They're not. And at the top of the towers, Gilbert wanted to put an observation deck. I think he even wanted to put a restaurant. And he told Ammann as he was designing it to put a place for boats to dock at the base of the tower so that, people could come up in their boat and go up to the observatories or a restaurant or whatever to keep it almost like a big tourist attraction. To think if that would have survived, what that would have been like today if you could go to the top of the George Washington Bridge, it would have been, I think it would have been a big hit.
Well, I think after 9/11, one wonders if it would still be open, but I couldn't agree with you more. What a hit it would be. One of the things, as I understand it, that kind of hampered the construction and some of the extra oddities they were going to put in with it was built during the Depression, right? The late 20s and early 30s. What kind of impact did that have?
So it had a huge impact. The idea was sort of born in the 20s. The actual original design of the bridge was done by New York's, their Bridge Commission, which they founded in the early 20th century. His name was Gustav Lindenthal. And Gustav Lindenthal had planned this Midtown Bridge, which was going to be like the largest bridge in the world. Hands down, it was a Goliath. It was going to have 20 lanes of traffic. 14 of those lanes was going to be devoted to rail. The towers were going to be taller than the Woolworth building. And it was going to start in Hoboken and end on 57th Street. And to build this bridge, they would have had to destroy most of Hoboken and most of 57th Street in the area to build it. And they really just said, no, this is not at all viable. And Gustav Lindenthal's assistant was Ammann. And Ammann said, listen, I can design this bridge and make it very elegant, very simple, and we can do it under budget. And he did. He came in under budget. And he came in with less time than he had actually quoted them to build the bridge, which is something New Yorkers now today with major infrastructural projects, they don't understand that concept because everything's late and more expensive. But the George Washington Bridge was cheaper than quoted and done in less time. But when Cass Gilbert came on, Lindenthal was taken off the project. And Gilbert is the one who sort of puts on the bells and whistles and says, no, we need a bridge with the stone sheathing. We need the observation decks. We need, these beautiful towers. And then, of course, the Depression hits. Cass Gilbert backs off. And Amon really gets to design the bridge that he wanted to design, which was a very simple steel suspension bridge. And so the Depression really let Amon build the bridge he wanted to because they had to scale back as much as possible. And Le Corbusier, who was a famous architect and urban planner, also Swiss, when it was completed, said it was the most beautiful bridge in the world. And I think that was because of its simplicity.
I mean, back to the efficiency of it, isn't it true that it went up the fastest of any bridge in New York?
Yeah. So I think still to this day, if you think about the fact that the Brooklyn Bridge was completed in 14 years, and the Williamsburg Bridge, I think, was a little over 7, and the George Washington Bridge was just shy of 6, I believe. It went up very, very quickly because it was the first bridge in New York's history that actually had a team of professional bridge builders working on it. All the other bridges up to that point sort of relied heavily on immigrant, untrained manpower. So, obviously people who were good at moving stone and putting things together, but they didn't know really the dynamics behind bridge building. And Amon put together a team of hundreds of guys who knew exactly what they were doing.
Now, isn't it true that about a dozen workers died during construction?
Yeah, a dozen workers did die, which I believe may be the second largest amount of fatalities on a New York bridge. I believe it was close to 30 on the Brooklyn Bridge because of caisson syndrome, because they didn't really know what it was or the bends.
Now, we've spent a lot of time talking about the bridge sort of from the roadway up. Let's go down underneath it to something that I'd say a lot of people know about this, if for no other reason because of the children's book, The Little Red Lighthouse and the Great Gray Bridge. Tell us about that lighthouse. And it was not originally there at what was known as Jeffrey's Point, right?
Yeah, so it's Jeffrey's Hook, and it wasn't there. So initially, as a way to announce to naval vehicles that there was sort of a jut that pointed out into the Hudson, which was Jeffrey's Hook, they had put a red pole, and it had a 10 candle power light attached to it that was put up in 1889. And then they kind of realized that wasn't really doing the trick. And when the city acquired Jeffrey's Hook, I think it was in 1896, in 1889, they relocated the North Hook beacon at Sandy Hook and brought it up in pieces to Jeffrey's Hook and rebuilt it. And that then served as the lighthouse that announced to ships, watch out, this is a piece of land that's sort of coming up to the middle there. Wasn't that large. It, as lighthouses go, it wasn't incredibly tall. Not exactly sure what the footage is on it, but I've been inside it. I've been on the top of it. It's it's not that high, but it is. You can tell why it inspired a children's book. It's an adorable lighthouse.
Now, it was going to be torn down, as I understand it, and it was the kids who saved it.
That's right. The Little Red Lighthouse, which was written by Hildegard Swift and illustrated by Lynd Ward, she was writing it in the early 40s. It was wartime, and her and Ward are down there, and they're, taking notes about the bridge, and he's, drawing the bridge, and they got stopped so many times because people thought they might have been spies sort of taking it out. So when the book comes out in 1942, it just becomes an absolute classic. And kids all over the country absolutely love it because it is this, adorable lighthouse under the Great Gray Bridge, as they call it. They wanted to destroy it, but there was a grassroots letter writing campaign from students all over the country. And the Coast Guard then deeded the lighthouse to New York City's Parks and Recreation Department.
Now, if you go to New York City, and who doesn't like to do that, there are so many things that would catch your eye. But for me, one of the best is after an evening out in New York, coming back up the Henry Hudson Parkway, and when the George Washington Bridge has its lights on. That is quite a spectacle, but it's not every night, is it?
No, it's not every night. They do it during special occasions. I remember multiple times, my parents live in northern New Jersey. I live in Brooklyn. The easiest way, if there isn't traffic for me to get home, is to cross the George Washington Bridge, go down the FDR. It's one of my favorite drives. And when the lights are on, I literally have to focus really hard not to swerve out of the lane because it's just so beautiful. You just keep your eyes on it. It is one of the most impressive sights on the skyline. But I've heard from the Port Authority that it is incredibly expensive to turn those lights on. Costs a lot of money. So they only do it on certain occasions, every once in a while.
Well, another way they try and adorn the bridge every so often on special holidays and occasions, and I actually got to drive under it one time. It was really one of the highlights of my driving experience, was they bring out this gigantic American flag. In fact, I think it's the largest free-flying American flag in the world, and it weighs, I think, 450 pounds or something. How did they do that?
It is the largest, at least I believe it still is the largest American flag. It's almost the size of a football field. What they do is, from what I've been told, is they actually have to raise it up, and they have crews on two sides of the tower, and then they unfurl it and then attach it to the bottom of the tower. And I forgot, it takes quite a few guys to get it done. And again, that comes out during special occasions, 4th of July. I have a feeling we'll be seeing it a lot when we start getting into, 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence signings, which are coming up next year. 9/11 was a big time when they had the flag out quite a bit. It's easy to talk about. It's hard to comprehend when you see it in person. It's incredible.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Now, when you talk about these guys unfurling the flag, I mean, that kind of rolled off your tongue, but the one thing I want to talk about now is these guys who actually repaint the bridge. Now, they have to climb up on these, barrels, I think they call them, and go all the way up to the top. And all told, anybody who's ever painted a room can appreciate this. There's 2.5 million square feet of surface on the bridge that has to be painted. And first they have to blast off all the old paint and then put on new paint. I literally just describing it here, I'm having butterflies in my stomach. I'm not good with heights. This must be extraordinary, the people who do this.
Yeah, so obviously you have to be incredibly well trained. And there are people who, bridge maintenance workers, the Port Authority and the MTA both employ. And these guys are absolute professionals. But if you look at pictures from their perspective, you don't understand how they can, humanly not feel queasy or absolutely petrified for being up that high. And if you look at even photos of them building the bridge, these guys had no harnesses. They were all hanging out up on the suspension ropes, and they were doing their work literally with no safety nets under them. And there's a famous photo of Ahmad himself, who is straddling at almost the highest point the suspension cables, proud of his work. And he's a young guy and he looks really vital. I would just be absolutely petrified. And these guys are doing it. There's been a multi-year, multi-million-dollar initiative because, again, as you stated, the bridge is almost 100. It needs a lot of upkeep, mainly a paint job, some shoring up in a couple of areas. So they've been doing it in stages, and they've been doing the work for, I think it's almost close to 10 years now. On the towers, it's a little bit easier because you have access to the towers through scaffolding. But once you get up on the top of those suspension cables and you're up there, you are freeing out to the elements. But yeah, it takes an incredible amount of training. They are not just, taking guys off the street and saying, all right, let's go paint the George Washington Bridge.
And the salary they get for that? Just $100,000 a year to start. Not enough, at least in my book. Well, that wraps up this episode of Amazing Tales About History. If you want to learn about the many intriguing aspects about New York City, check out Untapped New York. You just might end up on a tour with today's guest, Justin Rivers, their Chief Experience Officer. The answer to this week's trivia question, it's called Putz Hill, and on it occurred one of the most death-defying displays of horseback riding under gunfire ever seen in Connecticut, or anywhere else for that matter. What town is Putz Hill located in? Well, Putz Hill is on U.S. Route 1 in the town of Greenwich. Next week on Amazing Tales, about 250 years ago, Major General Israel Putnam rode his horse down the steps of Putz Hill, steps you can still partially see, in a daredevil act so amazing that not one of the British pursuers would attempt the same task. Amazing Tales About History is a production of True North Associates, LLC. This is Mike Allen. Be safe and stay healthy.